As more design content began emerging in these later schedules or these later networks, debates over milestones and order of build increased. And we have found that we've had to make some consideration for milestones. We are a DoD provider. And because of that, they work to milestones. And as a matter of fact, cash flow, our cash flow, is affected by meeting milestones. And so we had to do something. Again, a simple network, a project with several tasks, goes to an RFT date, and then there's a critical design review. Those are typical milestones. Preliminary design reviews, critical design reviews, and sometimes manufacturing turnovers. So we had to figure out how to model it and find out what were going to be the interactions for us. Was it going to produce more complexity? Here's an example of that model. And what we did is we added another project buffer right here on this CDR task. Now, what does it also do? It does a couple things that we're not real fond of. It makes the critical chain more complicated. Okay? It also changes the envelope of the man loading. It pulls work in a little bit. But we felt that it had to be a concession that we had to make at this stage in order for us to keep moving forward and still provide our customer with some kind of status on how well we're doing. Consistent upper management support and clear guidance were vital to maintaining buy-in and overcome all layers of resistance. Level 6 layer of resistance is a constant management process. It just doesn't stop. If the executive organization changes, additional training or additional education needs to be considered. We did not do that. This would include the implementation program manager. The effect of this, the negative effect of this, becomes real apparent during phase 5. Because you can really quickly determine whether you've still got buy-in or not. In other words, the management organization changed for us. Loss of organizational continuity that impact will be obvious in phase 5. If loss of continuity is not recognized, there are delays that occur. And what begins to happen is program issues begin to take over. We have programs. Like I said, we've gotten a lot of strong growth. We have a lot of programs that are running late, and we have a lot of interest from our customers. So program priorities begin to take over. A single buy-in session for the remaining project teams at this stage is not recommended, meaning train them as you need them. Otherwise, you're going to lose them after a couple months. When you get to that project team, train them then. Don't try to train them en masse, which is where we started from. Full launch. This activity actually began during phase 4. There was an initial buy-in of resource managers, which was a 2.5-day off-site session. We have completion of the technical implementation, and it provides the following. There are new metrics, and task updating is in effect. Project status and buffer analysis is in effect. And reinforcement of the new metrics is part of our employee performance evaluation process. We did get that into the process. We have and are continuing to develop a program plan for the home stretch, which says let's get to working to one schedule using TOC methodologies for everybody. But we have to address the following. TOC resource loading across all programs. Further network refinement is going on. Resource allocation and controls for task switching and program management action planning. And I'll explain in a minute how we're looking at that. And the TOC schedule must be the only schedule for managing the program. We're examining what does that mean for us as we move further into the Phase 5. How are we doing some of this? Additional training for program managers and resource managers that's specific to Reflectone's implementation. They wanted a clear statement. They said, we've lost the bubble. We don't know exactly why we're doing this across the managers. So we'd like a clear statement of how to actively manage programs, how to exploit the schedules with the available tool set, and what are the roles and rules of engagement for people. So we're sitting down with the senior management and working that out. What went well? Well, John said it. We are convinced TOC will work well in our environment. Our challenge is to exploit it further. We don't have it exploited as far as we'd like to go. We recovered a highly strained relationship with a major customer. In fact, that was one of the first networks I worked on. And the picture you saw up there was involved, one of the programs that was involved. And what's interesting for me is the delivery on the two devices that were associated with this customer is well within the project buffer that we initially scheduled. We also have been able to look at bids and proposals. Our delivery lead time was cut by nearly 50% on a bid response recently for a highly networked, reconfigurable prototype set of simulators. And here, the way we did this is we challenged assumptions around engineering design and the material releases and what we needed to do with those. And of course, as you got more and more experience, it becomes very straightforward as to where you need to focus. So we've been able to look at and respond to bids. We have unprecedented project team visibility and understanding of project requirements and detailed planning and scheduling that we never had before. There's unprecedented executive management information for company-wide decision making. Every program management review, which comes once a month, we put together an executive information package, which comes directly from our TOC information, so that they have it as every program reviews what has happened over the past month. And it's the first truly unified approach to managing and scheduling programs that's been successfully implemented at Reflectone. I've saw 3 of these implementation type things go on in the 15 years I've been at Reflectone. This is the first time we've been able to successfully establish something like this. TOC is providing the necessary focus for process improvement. We never sustained that with previous approaches. Across the company, we're examining our processes and what we need to do in order to shorten lead times. Information system innovation and automation through technology and data exploitation has been outstanding. I think we entered the new age. And the new age was with, whether we like to say it or not, Gates did some good stuff, and so have all the other software developers. But it provided a structure, an infrastructure, and tools that could come together very rapidly. And we were able to do that. We were able to take advantage of that with this method. And as a result of that, our team has been recommended for the British Aerospace Chairman Award for Innovation. What are our opportunities? Networks and critical change schedules as discriminators during bids and proposals, and for what if during that same phase. Can we do this or can't we do this? If we have applied some more resources, can we do that? And it's very quick. Once you've got the data in the networks, it's very quick to do this. We're looking to reduce overall delivery time. And so therefore we will continue, and I think we have already instituted a program for productivity and examining our processes. We have an opportunity to educate our customers. We have done that with Lockheed Martin. We've also done that with Boeing. We've had several of the groups in from Boeing in our 2-day offsites. And they're very receptive to what they see. We've had their scheduling experts in who work with networks. They work with critical path and MRP, and as I laid out how we were doing things, they said, there's nothing wrong with what you're doing, just keep doing it. So there's no problem with educating customers. We also have an opportunity to educate or do TOC implementation with major vendors. We now have 4 of us who have gone through an implementation. And provide new managers with skills essential for managing with TOC. We have these educational packages. It's very easy for us to show them to new managers as they come in. In slightly over a year, Reflectone is institutionalizing the culture change for TOC. Some areas for continuous improvement that are glaringly apparent. Wireless releases in our environment are on the critical chain, or actually they've been critical to us for a long time. We are now challenging assumptions around the release of those wireless in a big way. Vendor lead times. We haven't been doing enough statistical analysis on what really should be the vendor lead times. We're examining that now. Material information process flow is forcing bill of material structure changes. If you're going to understand long lead analysis, we found that we can't just have an engineering bill, we need a manufacturing bill of material. And the impact of scheduled milestones has also become very apparent to us. In the area of continuous improvement, we, over the next year, will be examining simplification of networks and reduction of planning lead time, as well as linking cost-earned value measurements. We cannot ignore the cost side of this. And so we have, and you'll see it in your package, I'm not going to review it, we have a way that we're going to move forward with a measurement in cost. Our philosophy now is using constraint management through information. Our programs are managed and information comes out of our TOC schedules and utilized in all these areas. Senior management, program management, material, which is production, and functional management. But it's also affecting our process engineering, professional development, tools and administration, as well as bids and proposals. Any questions? Yes?
You mentioned back some of the metrics and that they were now part of employee evaluation. Can you mention some of those and how you apply those?
Repeat the question.
He mentioned metrics and how they are part of the employee evaluation now. We have what's called a personnel development plan, which is from British Aerospace. And in there are objectives. And the resource managers, as well as resources, are identifying objectives in terms of tasks that they need to perform in order to support the TOC effort, the TOC schedules. And so those objectives then are identify measurements that they'll have to work to. They're different for various levels of management, like resource managers have different metrics that they're looking to, but they are part of the objectives. Okay? Any other questions? Yes. You want me to show it?
Please do. This question is directed, but I'm really extremely interested in Frank and John's answer to this. A fellow TOC practitioner and friend, whose name is Dick Franks, verbalized this particular conflict quite recently. And after seeing it, I realized that I've been running headlong into it in a number of implementations. The conflict says in order to avoid failure, you have to be a reliable supplier, and to be a reliable supplier, you have to schedule projects within the capacity of the organization. At the same time, to avoid failure, you need to avoid losing an important client from time to time. And to avoid losing that important client, Occasionally, you have to accept a client's quite infeasible end date. My question to you is, have you felt this conflict?
Sure we have.
Good.
We rely on some pretty simple, pretty fundamental rules. I happened to go to school at a military school in West Point. Honor is a big word. We tell truth. We run into all sorts of schedules where the client is asking for something that is unreasonable, and we always start out by telling them the truth. And we'll lay the issues out in front of them, and then we'll show how we can do various and different workarounds, and we will eventually, by confronting the issues, laying it on the table, get to a point where, as a minimum, they understand what we're doing. We've not had any problems, to be honest with you, with government customers in that regard. They'll yell at us and that sort of thing. We have had some problems in working with a number of primes, but we have stood by telling the truth, and if they decide to magic things up a little bit, that's their decision. But we call them like we see them. But we also have to be honest with ourselves, and that is one of the things this whole process does for us, is that it makes us go confront ourselves and look at what we're doing. And lots of times things that we thought may have been impossible turn out to be possible if you go study it hard enough, apply some imagination, and get a little bit creative. The one example that Bob mentioned with regard to a recent proposal, we had any number of discussions where our initial position with the customer was, hey, we're not going to be able to do this. We kept working it, making some compromises here and there, and we eventually came up with a schedule that just about fit what he needed to do, and we told it exactly like it was. It didn't quite fit, but we let him talk about the injection of risk into the program while acknowledging our actual calculated schedules.
Thank you.
You would think that sounds a little bit like Pollyanna, wouldn't you? But there's really no other way, in my view. This whole process is meant to apply some intellect and some logic and some discipline where before there was only emotion and throwing rocks at one another. So long as we can deal in that domain, then we have no problem in dealing with the truth.
Have you identified any kind of scheduling process or algorithm that will help you tackle this conflict, eliminate this conflict more readily?
No, there's no silver bullet. It's all tied into this whole process that Bob has shared with you, and figuring out new ways to understand what we're doing. That's usually the biggest problem in my view and in my experience. We'll get emotionally engaged. We'll say, well, this is the way it worked before, and we'll all take very firm and emotional positions without going in and really finding out what's happening. What this has done for us is given us the ability to be far more objective than we were in the past, and so we can find out if we've been kidding ourselves. We have 250 to 300 engineers in Tampa. A lot of engineers out there, I'm sure. Engineers are never wrong. And so you've got to put real data in front of all these real smart engineers, and eventually even all of us engineers will confront reality.
Thank you.
One of the assumptions under the cloud, of course, is that capacity is a determinate number as opposed to something that has no flexibility. And so some organizations that I'm familiar with actually have an ability to adjust capacity up and down, whereas normally we tell people to subordinate the promises to the capacity. They're willing to subordinate the capacity to the promises.
If I don't misrepresent this, and Bob can certainly correct me, part of what this is doing is causing us to look forward now as opposed to confronting the issues just when they slap us in the face. And so we are looking at various resource constraints, and we're finding that a lot of them are addressable. Some of them, however, are so huge, or some of them so intractable that they're not easily resolved. For our drum resource right now, it's a kind of engineer that thus far we have convinced ourselves requires years of preparation. We can't just go take a college kid and convert him. Now, I think that deserves some debate and some challenge, and that's really at the heart of where we are right now. But you do run into some real world organizational and capacity constraints. What's become very clear to me is that in the long run, as we work through this, and I think this is even as we are taught by D, our ultimate constraint is going to be the marketplace. It won't be what we have inside our walls.
If I may, I'd like to just make a comment on that last response. Some organizations indeed do find themselves able to adjust capacity, but there are others that are today finding themselves in extremely rapidly growing markets. And there's no way that they can adjust capacity to deal with all the requests for projects that are coming their way. So consequently, those particular organizations live this conflict with every new project.
No, they don't. No, they don't.
I need to tell a story, if I may. I have a recurring nightmare. It's gotten better over the last several weeks and months. But that recurring nightmare was that I was locked in a room with all of our customers, and they all asked me if I was going to deliver on time. Oh, God. I would wake up in a cold sweat. If you don't address infeasible end dates, or if you don't address the reality early, I'm going to end up standing in front of them getting my you-know-what chewed eventually anyway. So I'd rather get it out there up front, share the issue. A lot of customers will work with you. I mean, they have the same desires that you do. That's a whole lot easier than wait until the end, pretending you didn't know what was happening, and confronting reality. The second story that goes along with that. We've been in business 60 years. We've got engineers that have delivered a lot of simulators. I have only just returned to the simulation industry after being away for a decade. So I've only been in flight simulation for a couple of years. Everybody in our company knows more than I do, without a doubt. On one of these key program areas, we were making some commitments that we were going to deliver hardware last summer, virtually concurrent with our full launch of TOC. At that point in time, naive as I was taking the reports of all of our very bright and brilliant engineers and their leaders and managers and asserting that we were going to make a delivery to this particular customer towards the end of last summer. It took the customer coming in and beating the bejeepers out of me saying, "No, you're not." And he turned out to be quite right, to get my attention. Now, I'll tell you what, I stood in front of, part of what diminished our grand launch was I stood in front of 500 people in the high bay, said we were going to commit to this, we were going to start satisfying our requirements and meeting our customer demands, and banged on the podium and said, and anecdotally, unfortunately, and by God, we're going to deliver these 3 simulators at the end of this summer. And scores of people in the audience stood back there, snickering, shaking their heads. "John, you poor dumb son of a gun. We're not going to make that delivery." But part of the culture we were addressing was they didn't know it's safe to come tell me that at that point in time. So all of you need to know that you need to coach all of your colleagues and subordinates. Your CEO doesn't want to end up standing in front of a customer with no excuse. That is no doggone fun. So go confront it up front.
First of all, thank you for your answer. This is a phantom cloud. If you want it to be real clouds, then say avoid losing an important client now. Because this D prime will mean that you're going to lose him later, after you are tortured. Big deal. Okay? The real answer is what they're doing. You are looking on your processes, you are doing everything in place, lead time will go down and capacity will be exposed. Never ever commit to something that you know up front that you cannot deliver. This is a recipe for committing a suicide in the long run, even if you have to say no. So in this sense, absolutely right. Now you've said something else that I wanted to point out and to ask you, but it turns out that you're already aware of it, which is in the prudent way that you are going, very thoroughly, slowly, maybe it doesn't look to you slowly, but really thoroughly. Yes, the real job is now still ahead of you, which is once you launch it in full, then to make sure that everybody is following according to the buffer management. Okay? And this is not going to be easy. So you have about 6 months of jumping through hoops. But after that, it will become apparent that the constraint is in the market. What is your plan of action?
In many ways, that's a no fair, because the answer is the same for lots of folks in my position. We happen to be in a market with excess capacity, and so you look at the number of issues with regard to aggregation of businesses and swallowing the other guy before he swallows you, or in other cases, not to say that this is the case for Reflectone, doing the right thing for your shareholder and offering the business up to another entity. That doesn't happen to be part of our strategy at Reflectone, but is one of those strategic alternatives that you've got to consider. When the market becomes your constraint, you just have to go look at it honestly and decide how you're going to deal with it. And it's no surprise to any of you who read the newspapers. In the aerospace industry, there is immense consolidation ongoing, and that is one of the ways in which people deal with that kind of a market constraint.
Lousy way.
Good for you.
You know how lousy it is.
I'd be willing to take your advice, because I'm sure you've got a brilliant solution.
Thank you. But my advice to you is the following. You know that it's coming your way, that the market will become the real constraint. You know that you are also working in a market where there is a lot of excess capacity. It's already a throat-cut market. In 6 months from now, if your implementation goes well, and it looks like it's going very well, you will have a huge problem of a market constraint. No pressure on the bottom line, because you will do better than now. But it will become apparent that there is not enough orders coming in. The time to start to address that problem is not 6 months down the line. It's now. And you know how to address it.
Did anyone hear me say that we were not considering that now?
Excuse me. My question was, what do you do now in order to address it? I'm not trying to attack.
It falls in the domain of strategic planning,
Absolutely.
what we call value planning. And so that is the domain in which we are considering our alternatives in the whole realm of consolidation, in the whole realm of new markets to address,
Do you want a good advice?
in the realm of realigning our business where we see greater value for our shareholders.
Do you want a good advice?
Sure.
You're one of the best people already working with you. Her name is Dee Kinnan. Ask her to sit with you and to show you the process of how do you develop an unrefusable offer. It will take few months to develop and implement. That's the way to go, because otherwise alternatives will be consolidation in this.
This is a money-back guarantee, right?
No money back guarantee here. But you know with whom you are working, you know who is the person, you know how straight Dee is. Work with Dee to start to address it. Otherwise, it will hit you. Up to you. Common sense. Excellent. Thank you very much.